Every word spoken in the dark eventually finds its way back into the light of day. Join us as we explore the haunting echoes of past mistakes and the powerful stories of people finding their way home. Hit that subscribe button now and let the journey truly begin. The morning my son-in-law handed me a birthday card with a check inside, I noticed his hands were steady. No guilt. No hesitation. Just that wide, practiced smile that had fooled everyone in this family for 3 years, everyone except me. And I had taken far too long to trust what I already knew. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Walter. I am 68 years old. I spent 41 years as a high school history teacher in Dayton, Ohio. And when I retired, I had a pension, a paid-off house on Birchwood Lane, and one daughter, the most extraordinary person I have ever known. My wife, Carol, passed 11 years ago from a stroke. It was sudden. We had no warning. No goodbye. No final conversation. Just a Tuesday morning, and then the rest of my life without her. After that, my daughter became everything. She was the reason I kept the garden going and kept cooking real meals instead of cereal for dinner. She was the reason I stayed. My daughter's name is Renata. She is 41 now. She built her financial advisory firm from nothing, started in a one-room office downtown, slept on a cot in the back for the first 2 years. And by the time she was 35, she had 14 employees and a reputation in Columbus that opened every door she knocked on. I have never been more proud of any human being in my life. When Renata succeeded, I felt Carol somewhere close, nodding. She met her husband, Marcus, at a charity gala 6 years ago. He was a real estate attorney. Tall, well-dressed, good vocabulary. The kind of man who knew when to laugh at someone else's joke and when to offer his own. He was charming in a way that felt effortless. And I will admit, for the first 8 months, I liked him. I told Renata he seemed solid. I told her I was happy for her. I was wrong about Marcus, but I did not know it yet. They married on a Saturday in September. 3 years ago, the ceremony was at a vineyard outside Columbus. Everything was beautiful. I walked Renata down the aisle and I held it together until I felt her squeeze my arm right before she stepped forward. And then I did not hold it together at all. Marcus stood at the altar watching her, and I thought, this man loves my daughter. I believed that completely. The first Christmas after their wedding, Renata sat me down and explained something she had been thinking about for months. She had been worried about me. My pension was enough to cover the basics. But the roof on Birchwood Lane was aging. Property taxes had increased. And she had watched me quietly stop doing certain things. Skipping the barber, putting off the dentist, canceling my fishing trips to Lake Erie because the fuel cost had climbed. She was not wrong. I had been quietly trimming. I had not said a word because I did not want to be a burden to her. And she had noticed anyway, because she is her mother's daughter, and Carol never missed a thing either. Renata said she wanted to set up a monthly transfer, $3,000, directly into my checking account, first of every month. She had already spoken to her accountant. It was structured. She explained a gift allowance within IRS limits. Clean and simple. She said she was not asking me. She was telling me. And she did it with that smile that makes it impossible to argue. I said yes. I said thank you. I meant both. Then she said, almost as an afterthought, Marcus handles the household accounts and the personal transfers. He offered to manage it directly so it does not get mixed into the business cash flow. Is that okay with you? I said, of course. That was my first mistake. For the first 4 months, the money arrived exactly as promised. $3,000. First of the month. No gaps. I fixed the roof before winter. I went back to the dentist. I took my friend Gerald down to Lake Erie for 4 days in April, and we caught more walleye than we could carry. I called Renata and told her the trip was wonderful, and she said, good. Dad, that is exactly why I did it. Marcus was mentioned in passing. She thanked him for managing the logistics. I said to tell him I appreciated it. Normale conversation. Normal life. In May. The transfer was late. I checked my account on the 2nd, then the 3rd, then the 5th. Nothing. I did not want to call Renata about money. It felt ungrateful, almost accusatory, so I called Marcus instead. He answered on the 2nd ring, apologetic and smooth. There had been a bank processing delay. He said, completely on their end. Nothing to worry about. The money would be there by Monday. It arrived Wednesday. 11 days late. I told myself it was a bank issue. In June, the transfer was short, $2,200 instead of $3,000. I looked at the deposit 3 times thinking I had misread it. I had not. When I called Marcus this time, there was a brief pause before he answered. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds, but I noticed it. He said Renata had temporarily redirected part of the transfer toward a property tax prepayment on the firm and that she would make it whole next month. He said she was slammed right now and had asked him to handle it. He said she sends her love. I did not call Renata to confirm this. I should have. Instead, I waited. July was full again. August was full. I told myself June had been an anomaly. I told myself Marcus was managing a lot, and that I should be grateful, not suspicious. I went back to my garden and my books, and my twice-weekly walks around the Riverview Park path, and I let the summer pass. But something had shifted in me. I cannot explain it precisely. It was not a thought so much as a physical sensation, the way the air changes before a storm when there is not yet a cloud in the sky. I started writing down every deposit. I bought a small spiral notebook at the drugstore, and I kept it in the kitchen drawer, and every month I recorded the date and the exact amount and whether it matched what Renata had promised. By October, I had 4 months of records. 3 of them had discrepancies. Not large ones. $40 here, $120 there. The kind of amounts that feel like rounding errors unless you are writing them down in a spiral notebook and looking at them all at once. I still did not call Renata. What I did instead was start paying attention to Marcus. He came to Birchwood Lane about once a month, usually without Renata, usually with some practical excuse, dropping off something she had sent, checking on a minor repair, stopping by on his way to somewhere else. He was always pleasant. He always stayed exactly long enough to seem like a caring son-in-law, and not long enough to be asked difficult questions. He brought food sometimes. A casserole, a bag of groceries, once, a homemade soup in a mason jar that his assistant had apparently prepared. He mentioned the assistant twice, which I found odd. I began declining the food. I told him I was on a new diet my doctor had recommended. Low sodium. Very specific. He nodded and said that made sense and never mentioned it again. The real reason was something I did not say out loud even to myself for several more weeks, that something in the back of my mind had begun asking a question I was not ready to face. In November, I called my bank directly, not to ask anything specific, just to update my contact information. I told the representative, while I had her on the line, I asked casually whether there was any way to see where incoming transfers originated. She walked me through the process. It took me 20 minutes after hanging up to locate the routing information for the last 6 deposits. They were not coming from Renata's personal account. They were coming from an account I did not recognize. The last 4 digits were different from anything Renata had ever given me. I wrote the number in the spiral notebook. Then I sat at the kitchen table for a long time looking at Carol's photograph on the windowsill and asking her what she would do. She would call her daughter. So I did. It was a Thursday evening. Renata answered on the first ring, the way she always does when she sees my name. We talked for a few minutes about nothing, the weather, a book I was reading, a project at the firm she was excited about. Then I said, as carefully as I could, that I wanted to ask her something about the monthly transfers. There was a pause. Then she said, "What monthly transfers?" Dad, I set down the phone for a moment. Just for a moment. When I picked it back up, I asked her to repeat what she had said. She did. She said she did not know what I was referring to. She said she had been meaning to set something up for me for months, but that Marcus had said I was uncomfortable accepting direct financial help and had declined twice when he brought it up. She said she had been waiting until the right moment to bring it up again herself. My hands were completely still. I was surprised by that I expected them to shake. I told her I had been receiving money every month for almost a year. I told her it was not coming from her account. I told her about the spiral notebook. I told her about the discrepancies, the late payments, the short payments, the food I had stopped eating. I told her all of it in one long, steady breath. Renata did not say anything for a long time. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet and very controlled, the way it gets when she is working through something large. She said, "Dad, do not call Marcus. Do not mention anything to Marcus. Can you email me a photo of that notebook right now? I did. She called back 40 minutes later. She had checked 3 accounts, her personal account, the joint household account she shared with Marcus, and a business account she rarely used that Marcus had access to for real estate transaction processing. The joint household account had been accessed 22 times in 11 months for transfers she had not authorized. The total was not enormous in isolation, approximately $31,000, but it was money removed without her knowledge and routed through the account I had been watching, an account she had never seen before in her life. She had been funding my monthly support through a shell account Marcus had created, but some months he had simply kept a portion. Other months he had been late because he had spent the funds elsewhere and had to move money from a different source to cover the gap. Renata said, "Dad, I need you to call a locksmith tomorrow morning and change the locks on the house. Tonight, stay home." I said, "Renata, tell me the rest." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said Marcus had also been negotiating, without her knowledge, to refinance the building that housed her firm's downtown office. The building was in both their names, a property decision they had made jointly 2 years prior when the previous owner offered them a below-market deal. Marcus had been in contact with a buyer for 6 weeks. Renata had not known. The sale had not gone through yet. The title company had flagged a discrepancy and paused the process, but Marcus had already received an earnest money deposit of $18,000 into an account Renata had never heard of. $31,000 from the household account. $18,000 in earnest money. Negotiations on a building worth $420,000 that housed her entire business operation. I changed the locks the next morning. I also called my friend Gerald, who is 72 and retired from the Dayton Police Department, and asked him to come sit with me. I did not explain everything. I just said I needed company. Gerald did not ask questions. He brought his thermos and a deck of cards, and we sat at the kitchen table all afternoon. 3 days later, Renata met with her attorney. She did not tell Marcus. She had been sleeping in the firm's conference room on the pull-out sofa, telling Marcus she was in back-to-back client meetings. She had her IT director quietly revoke Marcus's access to the joint financial accounts. She had already spoken to the title company, who agreed to freeze the sale, proceedings pending a legal review. Marcus came to Birchwood Lane on a Friday, 10 days after Renata had called me. He did not know she had spoken to me. He did not know about the spiral notebook. He arrived with a bag of groceries and that same wide smile, and I invited him inside and offered him coffee. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where I had sat with Gerald, the same table where I had made my notes, the same table where Carol's photograph watched from the windowsill, and Marcus talked for 20 minutes about nothing. How work was busy, how he and Renata were thinking about a trip to Portugal, how he had been meaning to help me look into updating my HVAC before winter. Then he said, "By the way, I wanted to let you know the transfers might be a little thin this month. Renata shifted some capital toward a client project. Should be back to normal in January." I said, "Marcus, I know." He stopped. The smile stayed on his face, but something behind his eyes shifted. The way a light flickers before it goes out. I said, "I know about the household account. I know about the building. I know Renata has never authorized a single transfer to me in 11 months. I know the account you were using. I have written records of every discrepancy. He was quiet for 4 seconds. I counted them. Then he said I was confused. He said I was misremembering. He said this was a misunderstanding that he and Renata could straighten out very easily, and there was no reason for anyone to get upset. He said it in a calm, practiced voice, the same voice he used to explain away the late payments and the short deposits. And I realized in that moment that he had been using that voice my entire life with people who trusted him. And it had always worked. And he genuinely believed it would work again right now. I picked up my phone from the table and I called Renata. She answered immediately. I said, "He's here." And I put it on speaker. Renata said, "Marcus, I've been on this line for the last 20 minutes. He stood up. The chair scraped the floor. He picked up his bag of groceries, and that detail has stayed with me. That he picked up the groceries, as if his first instinct was to take back what he had offered, and then he set them down again. He stood in my kitchen with his hands empty, and that smile finally gone. Renata had already retained a forensic accountant. The total, once the firm's accounts were fully audited, came to $74,000 in unauthorized transfers and misappropriated funds over 26 months. Not just the 11 months I had been tracking, but a longer pattern that had begun shortly after the wedding. The building sale was blocked permanently. The earnest money deposit was frozen and ultimately returned to the buyer. Marcus did not contest the divorce. His attorney sent one letter that Renata's attorney described as the legal equivalent of a person sitting very quietly and hoping everyone would forget they were in the room. Renata's firm kept the building. The joint accounts were dissolved. A restraining order remained in place for 6 months. There was also this, a toxicology report. I had not mentioned the soup. The mason jar soup Marcus had brought in September, the one he said his assistant had made. I had not eaten it. I had put it in the refrigerator, and then, after a few days, I had poured it down the sink without ever opening it. I cannot tell you exactly why. I told myself it was the diet. But the truth is that by September, something in me had simply stopped trusting him. Not with evidence, just with instinct. And I listened to that instinct without quite knowing I was doing so. When Renata's attorney, in the course of the broader financial investigation, obtained records from Marcus's search history and communications, they found something, inquiries, about compounds, about how certain substances interact with blood thinners, and I have been on a blood thinner since my cardiac event 4 years ago. A fact Marcus knew because he had driven me to my follow-up cardiology appointment and sat in the waiting room for 2 hours while I was inside. The investigation was referred to law enforcement. I will not speculate beyond what has been confirmed. But I will say this. I am grateful for whatever instinct made me pour that soup down the drain. I am grateful for the spiral notebook in the kitchen drawer. I am grateful that Carol raised a daughter who noticed I had stopped booking fishing trips and decided to do something about it. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Renata and I drove to Lake Erie. We rented the same cabin I had taken Gerald to, the one with the crooked porch railing and the view of the water through the birch trees. We fished for 3 days, and we talked more than we had in years. She told me things about the marriage I had not known, the small erosions, the rewritten narratives, the way certain truths had been slowly replaced with more convenient versions until she had stopped fully trusting her own memory. She said, "I kept thinking maybe I was wrong about him. I kept thinking I was being unfair." I said, "Your mother used to say that self-doubt is what good people do when they're surrounded by people who don't deserve them." Renata looked out at the water for a long time. Then she said, "I think I remember her saying that. I'm not sure I ever actually heard Carol say it, but I think she would have. I want to say something to anyone watching this who is in the middle of what I was in the middle of, that quiet, creeping season when something is wrong and you know it, and you keep finding reasons not to trust yourself. Write it down. All of it. The small discrepancies. The late explanations. The moments where a smile stays on a face a half-second too long. Write it down, not because you need proof to justify your instincts, but because seeing it in your own handwriting makes it real in a way that the voice in your head sometimes cannot. I am 68 years old. I have lived alone on Birchwood Lane for 11 years. I have a daughter who is going to be okay. To a fishing cabin on Lake Erie, I plan to see again in May. And a spiral notebook I have kept as a reminder that paying attention is not the same as being paranoid. Sometimes it is the most important thing you can do. Thank you for listening. If this story stayed with you, I hope you will share it. And if someone you love has gone quiet about money, about help they were supposed to be receiving, how about small things that stopped adding up? Ask them. Ask them directly. Do not wait for the right moment. The right moment is now.